My name is Dr. Aram Ilias. I'm a board certified dermatologist. I've been in practice for almost 2 decades and raised 3 children. So not only do I have the opportunity to share my expertise, but also my experience in well over 100,000 office visits with patients in the past 20 years, and really getting to learn and understand the day-to-day challenges that my patients face in integrating the vast array of skincare knowledge into their skincare routines. So subscribe now and follow along, watch our videos so that you can really gain a better understanding of how to practically approach skincare without getting overwhelmed by so many products out there. You may have heard in the news that there have been a couple of reported cases of malaria in the United States this summer in Florida and in Texas. Now, this is a great opportunity to open up that conversation about insect repellents because we are starting to hear more and more about concerns about what we call vector-borne illnesses. Vector-borne illnesses are those diseases that are spread based on a vector, being a mosquito or some other type of insect, where it can spread disease to an individual. Now, some of us out there, myself in particular, happen to be mosquito magnets. When I go outdoors, somehow every mosquito seems to find me, whereas I get so many bites, my husband does not get any. So we do know that there are certain elements about different people, whether it be the scents that we emit or the carbon dioxide that we exhale, that do attract insects to us and actually make them more prone to bite us. So the thought or theory behind insect repellents is if we could deter those mosquitoes and other biting bugs from actually being attracted to our skin or attaching to our skin, that perhaps we can stop the reaction from occurring. Now, in terms of which diseases we tend to really focus in on when it comes to insect repellents, there are a number of diseases worldwide, but probably the most common would be malaria, Zika virus, dengue fever, West Nile virus, and Lyme disease. Insect repellents in particular were designed based on mosquito behavior, not insects broadly. It's important to get that off the table because sometimes we might think that we can use them for just about any purpose. However, in particular, they were really designed for mosquitoes, and over the years we have learned that some do have activity against ticks and other biting bugs, but it's important to understand which ones have activity against what and at what concentration and what form of application or in your environment that you use it, just so that you choose the right one for your purposes. When it comes to the ingredients available as insect repellents, I usually break them down as natural options and synthetic options. The synthetic ingredients that you might hear about would be things like DEET, D-E-E-T, picaridin, as well as IR3535. So these 3 ingredients were particularly designed in a laboratory to actually look at how mosquitoes are attracted to our skin, fool their smell sensory receptors so that they either are diverted away from our skin or not know how to reach their target. Now, the main natural ingredients that you may have heard of for deterring insects would be eucalyptus oil and citronella, and we'll talk in more detail about each of these. There are a variety of other oils that you might have heard about as well. However, not all of these have a lot of data to support their use, but also remember the data is designed to really focus in on how much protection they offer for preventing mosquitoes from landing on our skin and biting us, the whole goal being to prevent disease from spreading. If your goals are actually not that, if it's really more designed to just make your backyard experience more comfortable, there might be other options available to you. Then there actually are a variety of other options available that are designed to just capture or target flying insects as opposed to actually targeting mosquitoes, ticks, and other critters in particular. If that's your concern, we'll go over those in more detail as well. However, this talk is really more focused in on the prevention of spread of disease by targeting the insects responsible for doing so and the ingredients that have known activity against those particular bugs, especially mosquitoes and ticks, so that you can understand which one to use and how to integrate it into your skincare routine. The ingredient called DEET, D-E-E-T, has been around the longest and probably the one that you hear the most about because it has the best studied activity against mosquito-borne illnesses. It actually has a long duration of action and it is particularly effective. The reason why DEET got some attention, however, is there were case reports that in some children that absorbed too much of the ingredient or may have used it in higher concentrations had a risk of encephalopathy and seizures, which of course is very concerning. However, in lower concentrations when used, it is considered safe and effective and has a long duration of activity where it works very well. This is an ingredient that, say for example, if you're in an area that's at low risk for certain diseases, you may consider just lower concentrations of it or even alternative ingredients if you so favor that. However, if you are traveling in an area of the world that is a high risk of vector-borne illnesses, mosquito-borne ones in particular, sometimes it's worth talking to your doctor or your travel guide to decide whether or not the risks and benefits really do outweigh each other in this circumstance, because we would want to make sure you're effectively protecting yourself against disease, and sometimes using it carefully can be okay. Now, my personal favorite ingredient for insect repellents is actually picaridin. Picaridin you might not have heard a lot about, but it actually is one of the better ingredients out there and does have comparable results to DEET at various concentrations. So the story behind picaridin is it is in various insect repellent formulations and actually is really effective when you integrate it into your skincare routine to apply it after your sunscreen. I favor it for a lot of different reasons. One, picaridin has a much better safety profile. Two, it is much less toxic. It's not absorbed as much into our bloodstream as an ingredient like DEET is. Number three, now you might not have heard of this, and I do think it's a really important point to convey, is that if you apply a chemical sunscreen and then follow up with a DEET-containing insect repellent, both of those ingredients, DEET as well as your chemical sunscreen ingredients, have been known to be absorbed into your bloodstream. And if you use the two together, it actually increases or accelerates the absorption of both ingredients, which can increase the risk of toxicity of both ingredients. So what's really interesting, however, is picaridin, when you apply it after a chemical sunscreen, actually slows the absorption of chemical sunscreens into our bloodstream, and it itself is not well absorbed at all into our bloodstream. Now, if you are a fan of chemical sunscreen ingredients and would prefer to use those based on how aesthetically elegant they are to apply, I would say it's probably best in most circumstances to choose picaridin as your insect repellent, just to reduce the chances of absorption of your chemical sunscreen ingredients and increase its overall safety profile. Eucalyptus oil is found in some natural products to deter insects and has been shown to be effective against mosquitoes and ticks. However, it's not nearly as effective as DEET or picaridin at higher concentrations. Eucalyptus oil tends to be comparable to the lower concentrations of DEET when used in practice. So it is an option that you can have to use, especially in areas with a low risk of vector-borne illnesses, and especially if you're looking to avoid using something synthetic on your skin, although it does carry its own risks of skin irritation and contact dermatitis. Citronella has been increasingly used, and I find that it's really important to understand this ingredient because even though you'll see it in a variety of candles, sprays, you'll see it in tiki torches and other things that we use outdoors, this one is really important to understand because even though it's a natural ingredient, it actually is not as effective as you might think against certain insects. So it does have some activity against mosquitoes, but it does not protect us against fleas. It does not protect us against ticks. So if you're outdoors and you're hiking or other issues and you're really at risk for getting tick exposure, then citronella is not necessarily the best option for you. You might want to consider, if you're really seeking sort of natural options, is just wearing long sleeves and trying to protect your skin as much as possible, because citronella may not offer this protection that you're looking for. Citronella's effectiveness is also impacted by its instability in air and at high temperatures. So it's really only effective for about 2 hours, which is probably why we see it more so in candles and tiki torches, because they can still emit it over a longer stretch of time. Citronella does also have its own risks of skin irritation, eye irritation, so definitely be cautious with use, especially when you're using it in candles and other things, because I just worry that sometimes you might have irritation from these products, even if you're not applying it directly to your skin. There are so many theories I've seen that different people think about as to why they are mosquito magnets. There's been reports of maybe our blood type or different types of scents we emit, different foods we might eat. The story behind some of these is there are some possible connections. We do know that there's a connection possibly to the carbon dioxide that we exhale that allows mosquitoes to find us. There may be certain scents that we emit or that we might use, say in our soaps and shampoos and conditioners, that mosquitoes might be attracted to. There are some reports out there that banana consumption and beer consumption can increase our exposure or risk exposure to mosquitoes, perhaps allowing us to emit certain scents that they are attracted to as well. So all of these factors are possible. I have heard of and even read some reports on the possibility of our blood type. However, a lot of that research has actually not been really fully supported. However, I know a lot of people really do put their heart behind that possibility. What I tend to recommend to my patients, I live in the Philadelphia region, and our risk of vector-borne illnesses tends to be really focused in on ticks as well as for the possibility of West Nile virus as far as mosquitoes goes. Yes, if we're traveling to other regions, then I do change some of my recommendations based on that fact or based on very personal factors that patients may express that make them feel better about some ingredients versus others. I'd say just a generality, I think my favorite ingredient will still be picaridin because it is a very effective product that protects us against both mosquitoes and ticks, which would be the two most important critters in this region. However, if my patients are traveling and they're in a high-risk area for exposure to malaria, for example, then I would probably say that it might be worth considering using DEET instead at a higher concentration, up into that 30% concentration. But that would be really dictated by where they're traveling and the risk of illness in that area. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends not using DEET until after the age of 2 and limiting the DEET exposure to under 30%. For pregnant women, it has been found that the FDA believes that it's very safe to use DEET in the second or third trimester of pregnancy. The first trimester is when the baby is developing, and even though the EPA does believe it is reasonable to use, this is another instance where we have to weigh the risks and benefits. A pregnant patient might be at risk for a vector-borne illness that could impact the baby, so we always want to make sure that if they are traveling to an area that places them higher at risk, that maybe we can use products that they can use in lower concentrations and consider how they approach their skin protection from insects, whether it be long sleeve shirts, nets, and other physical modalities, as opposed to always using a product on their skin. But also recognizing that certain ingredients may not be fully effective. So just focusing on the natural ingredients might not always be the best way to approach it. Also recognizing that a lot of the natural ingredients can irritate the skin. And the last thing I want is to trigger another issue when we're trying to protect against one other problem. Even though it might be tempting for pregnant patients to choose some natural options like the eucalyptus oil or the citronella, it's really important to sit back and think about the scenario that you're in. So there's not a one-size-fits-all here, but it is true that some of the natural ingredients are more prone to skin irritation, and sometimes during pregnancy our skin can be more sensitive. So I would caution against just jumping on the natural ingredients because you might be triggering other types of skin reactions. There are ways that we can approach each and every scenario based on the circumstance to decide which ingredient might be best. If a pregnant patient is traveling to a very high risk area for malaria or other vector-borne illnesses like Zika virus came up a few summers ago as well, then it might be reasonable, especially in the second and third trimester, to consider a DEET-containing repellent just to protect them and the baby from any of these illnesses. However, again, these recommendations should be really personalized based on the circumstance and the comfort level that our patients have with those scenarios and what options they have so that they can decide which is best for them. The best part about placing an insect repellent in your skincare routine is it is the last step as it is. So it's not that you have to think about sequences of steps. It would be the very last thing that you apply to make it its most effective, because again, those ingredients that are applied are being emitted out to basically fool those mosquitoes and their sensory receptors that dictate their smell from even attaching to or finding you. So you want it to be the very last step so that it's not impacted or affected by any other products that you place on top of it. The fortunate thing about that is, because it is the last step, is you can actually dictate when you're going to use it. Because, for example, if you don't plan to be outside or in an area that tends to be a high risk for exposure, or you're not going to have the windows open when you're indoors, you probably don't need to apply it. However, if you do plan to spend some time outdoors and you need to have an option, this is when we go through each of the options out there so that you can decide which one makes the most sense for you given the circumstance. I recommend applying insect repellent as your very last step after your sunscreen, and only on the exposed areas of your skin, which makes it very simple. So you only have to integrate it in when you need it. One would be the basics. That would be things like mosquito nets, staying indoors, screening your windows when you open them, using long sleeved shirts and pants so that you just avoid exposed areas of the skin. When you go beyond insect repellents that you apply to your skin as sprays, lotions, or other ways to apply it, there also are very practical physical means of protecting your skin. The basic things would be things like wearing long sleeve shirts and long pants so that you just reduced exposed areas of skin. There is the option to use mosquito nets, and so that would be basically creating sort of a barrier, like a world around yourself where mosquitoes and other winged insects can't enter into it. So this in certain parts of the world is very effective, because sometimes you just need to create sort of a safe space for yourself. That mosquitoes and other insects tend to favor vegetation, undergrowth, areas to hide in, to nest in, to plant their larvae in, standing water. It is important to also consider the role that just looking through your property and making it a less friendly place for these types of insects to breed can be very helpful. The other things that are out there, some people have heard of this, where there actually is the option to spray your clothing, or in some cases the top sheet or bed sheet that you might sleep with, especially if you're camping, with an ingredient called permethrin. Permethrin is another insecticide that can be used to basically deter insects as well as kill them on sight. So it is something that you can use, with the challenge being that it only lasts as long as it's there. Once you wash those clothing items or those bed sheets, it does tend to wash out, and it's hard to say how long it retains its effectiveness. And of course, you are exposing yourself to another ingredient. So it has sort of, in the up and coming world, I am a functional textile expert. There are clothing textiles that have been designed to actually, just like there are textiles that have sun protection built in, there are ones that have insect repellent built in. So probably more so for the hiking world or the outdoor fabric world. Probably more for the hiking and outdoor activity world, you might see some of these textiles where it will say insect repellent. The challenge is also, it's hard to predict how long that will sustain itself through washes, as well as high temperatures and other factors, because these garments are not that well studied, but they are available. There's some talk even of, when you do get sort of scented beads that you might add to your wash to add a scent or a fragrance, that there are some that are being developed that could potentially add in some of the insect repellents in those little beaded particles. If you've ever used any of these scented beads that people add to their laundry cycle to add scent, it works by kind of micro encapsulating those fragrance elements and then embedding them into the textile, so that when you kind of rub the fabric together, it releases a really nice aromatic scent. There are some products that are being developed to actually integrate within those beads insect repellent, natural oils, and scents to make those fabrics a little less attractive to insects. So hopefully that just by wearing them, you're less likely to attract some insects as well. I look at the whole picture as saying, well, we have so many ways to protect ourselves from vector-borne illnesses, and each and every one of these elements plays a role, whether it be using a spray, a stick, a cream, whether it be using physical barriers like nets, whether it be using, bug zappers that are out there, and using any other factor that we can The overall overarching goal is just to protect us from exposure to these illnesses. There's not necessarily one way to approach preventing the spread of vector-borne illness. Ideally, we're protecting our skin from exposure, whether it be through long sleeves and then spraying those areas that are exposed with an insect repellent of choice. Also understanding the environment around you, we're considering the use of citronella or eucalyptus oil, so that basically makes the environment around you less friendly to insects overall. Using physical barriers like nets, keeping the windows closed, staying indoors, long sleeves, all of these measures do work. It's really important to sit down and make a plan for yourself based on your exposure risk, where you live, where you travel, and what you really want to protect yourself against, and design an insect repellent protocol based on what you need.